Maybe it's happened to you. You meet someone, you fall in love, and you hope that this time everything will be different. But in the end, things cool off or get stuck, and you end up hurt in the same way as always. It's like you're repeating the same story, but with different characters. And it hurts, right? I understand you. And the most frustrating thing is that even though you wish with all your heart for a healthy love, without realizing it, you keep choosing people who hurt you in a similar way. It's almost as if a part of you is trapped in a spiral of heartbreak, reliving the same painful chapter over and over and over again. Why does this happen? Why do you keep making the same mistake in love? Why do we do this to ourselves even when all we want is to love and be truly loved? Today, I want to talk to you precisely about that. I promise that by the end of this episode, you will understand why you repeat certain patterns in your relationships and, most importantly, what you can do to finally break all those cycles of pain. Let's explore together how to identify whether you're choosing your partners from your wounds or from a place of self-love. In other words, whether the one making decisions in love is your wounded inner child or your adult conscious self. This is so you can stop playing on the field of heartbreak and pain and start playing on the field of real, healthy love. Stay with me, because I'm also going to help you see how the traumas of abandonment, rejection, or betrayal that you may have experienced show up in the way you love. And we're going to talk about why, without meaning to, people generally connect with others who treat us in ways similar to the important adults from our childhood. But that's not all. At the end, I'm going to give you some key steps to heal those wounds and start choosing from wholeness, from awareness, and from self-love, so that you no longer do it from a place of lack, trauma, or fear. I want to start this episode by sharing with you the story of one of my students, whose name I will change for privacy. We'll call her Laura. The first time Laura opened up to me during the weekly perspective sessions we have in my courses, her voice was trembling and she was on the verge of tears. She told me, "Johnny, I don't understand what's happening. Why do I always choose wrong? Why do I always end up with men who hurt me or abandon me? There must be something wrong." Well, her pain was obvious from miles away. Laura is an intelligent, caring woman with a lot to offer. But even so, she had spent years feeling broken inside every time a relationship ended. Every time a man left her or treated her with indifference, that deep wound inside her would open up again, as if it were the same wound over and over again. And as I listened to her, I could see her wounded inner child behind those sad eyes. That inner child who maybe once learned that love hurts, that loving means begging for scraps of affection, or that it means sacrifice. Laura blamed herself and thought she wasn't enough, that she didn't deserve something better in love. And honestly, it broke my heart to see her like that. Because in her words and in her story, I recognized the story of many other women and on some level parts of my own story too. And I'm almost sure you felt that way too. True or false? Maybe you've silently asked yourself, maybe love just isn't for me. Why do I end up in relationships where I feel afraid or not enough, or where I'm not valued? I want you to know something. You're not alone in this. And going through this doesn't mean you're a broken person or destined to always suffer. It just means there are wounds in you that need to be addressed and healed. You have ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that we need to identify and reconfigure. What I told Laura at that moment and what I want to tell you now is that you can get out of that cycle, you can break that pattern, you can heal those wounds. Laura, with time and with the guidance and methodology I gave her during that period, was able to understand what was happening to her deep down and completely transformed her way of loving. And you can also heal and achieve that healthy love you long for so much. So please take a deep breath. And let's go together, you and I, on a very personal journey. A journey to the depths of your own being, your wounds, everything you've stored there for years. And then we will come back to the surface, to the light of a new way of loving that you can start practicing from today. So first, let's talk about how to identify from where you are choosing your partners. From your wound or from your self-worth. In other words, who is making the decisions in your love life? your wounded inner child, or your healthy conscious adult, the victim or the self-possessed person. Choosing from the wound means that it's that hurt part of you that's holding the steering wheel and the reins. It's that inner child part that maybe felt abandoned or rejected, betrayed in the past and still desperately searching for something to soothe that old pain. When we let that wounded part choose, we unconsciously look for people who match our wounds. And I know it sounds strange, but it's as if the wound is trying to recreate the situation that caused it in the first place. Maybe hoping that this time it will have a different ending. It's like your scared inner child is saying, relive the past in order to change it, because maybe this time they really will love and care for me. And maybe, even though it seems like the same old story, this time I can change the ending. On the other hand, when you learn to conquer your inner world, you choose from a place of self-worth. And that's when your conscious adult self is the one who decides. In other words, that version of you that values yourself, that knows what you deserve, that knows what you offer, that isn't afraid to be alone, and that doesn't want someone to come and give you what you already give yourself. So, your healthy adult is the one who can say, I want to become whole, not to fill voids. I deserve a love that is good for me, and I am willing to wait or look for something truly good. That adult doesn't choose out of need or fear, but out of a genuine desire and conviction that it's the right thing for you. To illustrate this better, let's go back to Laura, my student. At that time, Laura had her conscious adult completely switched off when it came to matters of love. Very rational, very logical, very successful and strong in other areas of her life. But in the emotional and sentimental area, it was her wounded inner child who ruled her, who was in charge. That little girl inside her, who was once abandoned by her father when she was just 5 years old, kept making decisions out of the fear of being abandoned again. So, what did Laura do without realizing it? She got involved with men who precisely triggered that fear and touched that wound. Distant men who wouldn't commit, those classic situationships, or men who sooner or later would leave her again. And every time one of them left her or ghosted her, that inner child confirmed her painful belief and told herself, see, we're not enough. They will always leave us. When your traumas rule you and you make choices from your wounds, you can notice certain signs. For example, do you feel anxious? It's like you need that person to feel okay. Do you tolerate behaviors that hurt you just so you don't lose the little love you think you have? And sometimes you even feel like you go back to being that little helpless boy or girl in the dynamic of the relationship. It's like you go back in time emotionally. On the other hand, when you work on yourself, you can make choices from a place of self-worth, and that feels very different. It doesn't mean you don't feel butterflies in your stomach or very pleasant emotions. Of course you feel them, but there's peace and stability beneath those emotions, not insecurity and fear. You know that if that relationship doesn't work out, you'll be fine. That's why you don't base your worth on that person's opinion or affection, because you already consider yourself a valuable person. You set boundaries when you don't like something, and you also set boundaries for yourself. And you do it even if you're afraid of losing the other person, because you know it's worse to lose yourself. I mean, you prioritize yourself without stopping loving the other person or putting effort into the relationship, but you no longer abandon yourself. And a simple way to tell the difference is to ask yourself, am I choosing this partner out of fear of being alone, out of anxiety, or because I want something so I don't end up with nothing? Or am I making this choice from a place of calm, from awareness, from my sense of wholeness, and from knowing who I am, what I offer, and what I deserve? If you feel a lot of anxiety and an emptiness that only seems to go away when that person pays attention to you, you're probably choosing from your wounds. If on the other hand, you feel excitement but also calm, and your self-esteem remains intact no matter what happens, well then it's your adult, healthy, conscious and present self that's guiding or leading you. Identifying this is crucial because it's the first step to changing course. When Laura, my student, realized that she had been making choices based on the wound left by her father's abandonment, it was like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, she was able to see herself from the outside and say, "Ah, no wonder I always end up the same way. I've been unconsciously looking for men who make me relive what I know instead of what I long for." And it was hard for her to recognize and accept this, but it was also the beginning of her healing and her liberation. Now let's talk about those wounds we've been discussing. What exactly are they and how do they manifest in the way you love? There are 5 main childhood wounds, but 3 of them are the most common and deepest when it comes to romantic relationships. I'm referring to the wound of abandonment, the wound of rejection, and the wound of betrayal. Each of them is caused by different perceptions or experiences, but all of them can leave very strong emotional scars that have a big impact on our relationships in adulthood. The wound of abandonment, so you can understand it, imagine a little girl whose parent or both parents left her alone at an important moment. It can be physical abandonment, for example, a father or mother who left home and never came back, or it can also be emotional abandonment. And by that I mean a dad or mom who are physically present in the same space, but who are cold or emotionally absent. So that girl grows up believing, feeling, and acting based on the idea that the people she loves can disappear from her life at any moment. That's what she believes. So how does she love as an adult? Most likely from a place of fear. Afraid of being left again. Afraid of being hurt again. And then she either becomes very dependent and anxious, very afraid of abandonment, doing anything to please and to keep her partner from leaving. Or she might go to the opposite extreme and be so terrified of being left that she prefers not to connect too much with anyone. In other words, not get attached to anyone. And she might even sabotage her relationships, even if those relationships have a lot of potential, just because she's afraid of getting involved. And all of this because she's always thinking, I'd rather leave before they leave me. I'd rather be the one to end things before they end things with me. In the case of Laura, my student, her abandonment wound made her cling on, endure mistreatment and a lot of emotional abuse, just to avoid feeling that emptiness of being left again. If you don't work on yourself and heal, then your biggest fear becomes your guide, and that usually leads you to a very bad place. The other wound is the wound of rejection, and this usually forms when, as children, we feel that we weren't accepted just as we were. For example, maybe you had a very critical father or mother who made you feel like you were never enough. Or maybe you suffered bullying at school, or you were compared to other siblings or kids, making you feel less. And that feeling that you didn't matter or that you weren't good enough really hit you hard. And how does that wound show up in love? Well, when you're an adult, you have a huge sensitivity to rejection. That's why you avoid showing who you really are, out of fear. For example, fear that if your partner sees your flaws or your vulnerabilities or who you really are, they will reject you. You might find it hard to say no or set boundaries because you're afraid that if you do, the other person won't love you anymore. Or you spend your life changing who you are or doing things just to please others or to fit in or to be accepted because deep down you feel that if you don't please people, they will reject you. And you might even end up with people who, without you realizing it, reinforce that feeling of rejection. I'm talking about very critical people who are always judging you, criticizing you, or even making you feel invisible because unfortunately, that's what you know and what you mistakenly believe is what you deserve. And the other wound I want to mention in this episode is the wound of betrayal. This wound appears when someone we trusted lets us down in a very significant way. It could be a father or a mother who promised something important and didn't keep it, or maybe was living a double life. Or maybe your mom spoke badly about your dad, making you distrust men, or maybe, as a teenager, you had your first love and they cheated on you with someone else. Betrayal destroys trust at its most basic levels. And so if you carry this wound, then in your adult relationships, you can become very distrustful. Jealousy is a huge symptom of this, and you're always on guard, waiting to get hurt or waiting for the other person to fail, because in your experience, people always let you down and always betray you. And that can make you, as I said, a very jealous person without reason, or controlling, or wanting to have everything planned out. And it can also cause you a lot of anxiety because of everything you imagine. Or the opposite can happen, where you tolerate infidelities and lies in your current relationships because very unconsciously that's your definition of love. You think that's normal, that that's how love is, that love involves betrayal, and that it's a roller coaster where sometimes you're going to get hurt or disappointed, but you stay because you believe that's just how it has to be. It's like a mental mechanism that says, well, if in the end everyone betrays you, then it's better to stay here even if it hurts, because what if it's the same or even worse with someone else? These wounds shape our reality and the way we love, almost as if we were wearing glasses that distort everything without us even realizing it. Through those glasses, we perceive and interpret the actions of our partner and our whole life. But the most important thing is that from there, we react to what we perceive. For example, with an abandonment wound, if your partner seems a little distant, you will immediately feel panic and think that they have stopped loving you, when maybe they just had a bad day or don't feel like talking. If you have a wound of rejection, even if your partner forgets something small, it may feel huge, as if confirming you don't matter to them. And with the wound of betrayal, if you see your partner talking to someone, it could be anyone, you will immediately assume that something is wrong or that they are going to cheat on you, even if there is no real evidence. In my courses, I explain all of this in depth, but today the most important thing here is for you to understand that you are not a crazy, broken, or weak person. You are just a human being with real wounds. We all have them, and we all have to work on them. Did your heart learn to protect itself the best way it could? But the problem is that those defense mechanisms, which once helped you survive emotionally, now lead you to confirm exactly what causes you the most fear and pain. If you're so afraid of being abandoned and that's why you become too dependent and suffocate the other person, then it's possible that person will end up leaving because they feel suffocated. And then your prophecy comes true and you say, they abandoned me, confirming your own belief. Or if, for example, you're so afraid of betrayal that you constantly accuse your partner, you might end up pushing them far away or creating a toxic environment where trust is broken and where maybe your partner looks for what they can't find at home because of the stressful and unappealing game of cops and robbers that they play. That's why it's so important to recognize these wounds, because if you don't, it's like trying to sail with a hole in your boat. No matter how much you want to move forward by rowing, if you don't fix that leak, you're going to sink. Now, these childhood wounds often translate into what we call attachment patterns in adulthood. And these attachment patterns are ways in which we learn to relate to others, based on how safe or unsafe we felt with our parents or caregivers as children. Without getting too technical, I'm going to explain it to you like this. When we were babies or little kids, we all depended 100% on our parents or our caregivers. True or false? We needed to feel protected, cared for, and loved. If that love and attention were consistently present, then you probably developed a secure attachment. That is, as an adult, you tend to be someone who feels comfortable with intimacy and trusts others in a healthy way. But if there was inconsistency, abandonment, or mistreatment, your emotional system learned other strategies to get people to take care of you or pay attention to you. For example, maybe you became very anxious to get attention or very distant to avoid getting hurt. And that's exactly where anxious and avoidant attachment come from. To better understand anxious attachment, imagine a boy or a girl who was never sure when his mom would be in a good mood, when she would be loving, or when she would be absent or angry. That uncertainty could have created a lot of anxiety for that boy or girl. So, as an adult, it's likely that this person feels a lot of distress at the thought that their partner might stop loving them or abandon them. If you, who are listening to me, have anxious attachment, you might identify with things like constantly seeking reassurance of love. The famous, "Do you love me?" "Is everything okay between us?" "Tell me you love me." You do that because you're very afraid that your partner will find someone else. That's why you constantly seek confirmation that they love you, and that's why you might feel jealous for no reason or without a clear reason. Or maybe that's why you sacrifice your own needs and boundaries just to keep your partner happy. You live with a kind of urgency, as if the relationship is very fragile and could break at any moment. And this, of course, comes from that fear of loneliness and of not being good enough for someone to choose you and stay with you. And on the other hand, to understand avoidant attachment, think of a child who learned that every time they cried or showed a need, they didn't receive comfort or support and instead were punished or ridiculed. So, what did that child learn? Well, it's better not to show what I feel and better not to depend on anyone, because every time I do, it hurts. That's why, as an adult, that person may seem very independent, like nothing affects them. And that's why, when they're in a relationship and there's a conflict or things get a little difficult, they shut down, they distance themselves, they freeze up, they don't want to talk, they need a lot of space, or they even want to break up and leave. If you identify with avoidant attachment, then maybe you'll notice that when someone gets too emotionally close to you, you get uncomfortable and seek some distance. And you might prefer more casual relationships or ones without so much commitment. Or when you feel like you're asked to be emotionally present, you say, I need time for myself. And then you end that relationship because you thought it was too overwhelming. And it's not that you don't want to love, it's that loving scares you because it means needing the other person a little. And in your experience, that hasn't worked out well for you. The interesting and somewhat ironic thing is that often people with anxious attachment and those with avoidant attachment end up together in relationships. They're like two ends of a magnet that attract each other. One is afraid of being abandoned and so they chase, while the other is afraid of being invaded or suffocated and that's why they run away. Does this emotional cat and mouse dynamic sound familiar in your relationships? Well, it's actually much more common than you think, and it causes a lot of pain because basically both are acting out of fear from their wounds and unintentionally trigger each other's wounds. The anxious person chases more when they feel the other is pulling away, and the avoidant person pulls away more when they feel the other is chasing them. A vicious cycle forms, and here's the most important part. Most of the time, we don't even realize that we're trapped in those attachment patterns. For us, that's just what love is. That's how we've always experienced love. The anxious person might think, well, it's normal, isn't it, to love with such intensity and to suffer a bit in love because love hurts. And the avoidant person will probably say something like, well, I'm just not very emotional, that's how I am, I like my space, and it's normal for me to want to escape when someone gets too intense and suffocates me. Both believe that their reactions are natural, and maybe even think that the other person is the one with the problem for having the opposite style. But when you look at it from the outside, you understand that these are two ways of protecting themselves from pain. The anxious one makes themselves small and pleading so they won't be left, and the avoidant one becomes cold and elusive. They're the scared child and the distrustful child interacting in adult bodies and relating to each other from their wounds. In the case of Laura, my student, she clearly had an anxious attachment style. When she was in a relationship, she experienced constant emotional ups and downs. She told me that if her boyfriend didn't reply to a message in a few hours, she would start to panic and imagine and assume 1,000 things, like that he was going to leave her or that he was with someone else. And she could only feel calm if he was by her side at all times, showing her affection. But as soon as he seemed a little distant, even if it was just because he was busy at work, Laura felt like her world was falling apart. She would cry, get anxious, and sometimes demand or beg for attention in very toxic ways that later made her feel guilty or ashamed. That was her wounded inner child acting out of reaction, not out of awareness. It was that little girl who one day saw her dad leave and didn't know if he would come back. And now she was the woman who trembled every time her partner seemed to leave. And I mean leave emotionally, not necessarily physically. And maybe you identify more with the anxious style, or maybe with the avoidant one, or even with both at different times. Sometimes the same person can have a bit of both, depending on the situation. The essential thing is to start noticing it, in other words, to become aware. And for that, you need to observe yourself and your reactions. Ask yourself, do you tend to cling and lose yourself out of fear of losing the other person? Or do you tend to close yourself off and put up walls as soon as someone tries to get a little closer to you? Notice it, don't judge yourself. Have a lot of compassion, because this isn't about labeling yourself as dependent, toxic, or cold, but about understanding where it all comes from. The reality is that we repeat bonds with people who make us feel the way we felt with our childhood caregivers. That is, we recreate emotional dynamics that we had with our dad, mom, or whoever was our main caregiver. As children, our first idea and meaning of love comes from there, from how we were treated, from what we saw between our parents, and from what we perceived or felt at home. That gets stored deep within our unconscious programming. And even though as adults we consciously say, I don't want anything to do with what I experienced as a child, I want something different, the unconscious sometimes works against us. It's as if we carry inside us a map of love that we drew in childhood, and even if that map leads us down painful paths, we keep using it over and over again because we don't have another one. We don't know any other. Now, you're probably wondering, why do we repeat something that made us suffer? It doesn't make sense. To understand it, think about this. Human beings seek out what is familiar because what is familiar is predictable. And that gives us a false sense of security. That's true even if what's familiar has been painful. I know it sounds contradictory, but what is familiar, simply because it is known, attracts us on a very deep level for two main reasons, in my opinion. First, because since we know it and we've survived it, we believe that in some way we can handle it, we can deal with it. And also, as a second and even more important reason, is that we try to fix in the present what we couldn't change in the past. Without realizing it, we look for a second chance to get that love we lacked and weren't given. For example, if as a little girl or boy you felt that you never had your mother's or father's love the way you needed it, because maybe, I don't know, they were a cold person or didn't know how to show it to you. It's possible that as an adult you feel attracted to people who are also cold or emotionally distant. This is because inside you there is an unconscious hope that this time someone will love you the way mom or dad couldn't. Inside you there is the hope of healing your family history through that partner's love. But it doesn't work that way. It's like having an open wound and looking again and again for the same kind of person who opened it, hoping that this time, instead of hurting you, they'll heal it. That's why your inner child wants to go back to the place where the trauma began, because he hopes to achieve a different ending. Let me give you another example. If you had a very authoritarian or very critical father, you might end up with partners who control or criticize you. Why? Because that feeling of being with someone dominant who makes you feel small is familiar to you. And you might try to please that person and earn their approval just like you longed for your father's approval as a child. That's why every time your partner, who acts like a critical father, gives you a little bit of recognition, you feel a great momentary euphoria, but when they criticize you, you feel crushed and it hurts a lot. It's the same emotional roller coaster from your childhood, but now it's repeating in your adult life. And this is one of the hardest concepts to accept, that sometimes without realizing it, we've chosen partners who treat us badly or hurt us. And not because we consciously believe we deserve that. No one would want something like that consciously, but because our wounds pushed us toward what is familiar. This isn't for you to blame yourself or feel bad, but for you to understand yourself and have more compassion for yourself. Your inner child thought they were doing the right thing by following that old map, but now that you know this, it's time to draw a completely new map. If you take some time to reflect, you'll find a lot of parallels between your past partners, similarities. Maybe several of them shared a trait in common that someone from your childhood also had. It could be very obvious, or maybe not so much. And maybe you don't realize it right away, but ask yourself, how did this person make me feel? Did they make me feel the same way I felt with my mom or my dad? Because sometimes the connection is in the emotion. For example, with ex, I constantly felt like I wasn't enough. Oh, that's how I felt with my mom or my dad. It's important that you check it. Or you might think, I don't know, with that person, I was always afraid they would leave. Ah, of course, that was my number one fear when my dad traveled and left me with my grandma. When you identify this, it's not so you can blame your dad or your mom. It's totally valid to feel anger or sadness when you discover it, but it's not so you can blame them. It's mainly so you understand that if these patterns were learned, you can also unlearn them. You're not a person doomed to repeat the story over and over again. You can honor what you lived through, heal that wounded part inside you, and choose a different path for your future relationships. So at this point, we've talked about wounds, patterns, past traumas that show up in the present and affect your future. And maybe you're thinking, okay, Johnny Abraham, I get it now. My wounds and traumas might be running the show. But how do I know if the relationship I'm in or the ones I'm looking for are really trauma bonds or healthy, conscious bonds? I mean, real, beautiful love. And this is something crucial, recognizing whether we're in a trauma bond or a conscious one. Because that distinction can be the difference between staying in the painful cycle or freeing yourself from it. A trauma bond is a relationship where the main connection between two people is formed through trauma, that is, through shared or inflicted pain, and the emotional adrenaline they cause each other. These are often very intense and even addictive relationships where there are very high periods and also very low ones, and those ups and downs are very pronounced. In other words, there are moments of very passionate love followed by moments of very deep pain. In a trauma bond, it's common for there to be unbalanced power dynamics, meaning manipulation, extreme dependencies, lack of respect, lack of boundaries, and even emotional or physical abuse in more serious cases. What characterizes a trauma bond is that even though the relationship hurts you, you feel like you can't leave it or end it. You cling to that emotional roller coaster, and above all, you get hooked on the hope of those good moments, even if there are very few, because you swear there are signs that this time everything is going to change. On the other hand, in a conscious bond, the relationship is built with intention, con presencia, con emotional responsibility, and a lot of emotional work, both individually and together. In other words, mutual respect and care. In a conscious or healthy relationship, both people are aware of their own wounds. They work on them to try not to project them onto the other person, let alone take them out on their children. In a conscious relationship, a foundation of trust and open, empathetic, nonviolent communication has been built. And although there may be conflict, because every human and healthy relationship has them, in a conscious and healthy love, arguments don't become very violent problems, but instead create a sense of order, peace, and accomplishment because they lead to agreements. And don't confuse peace with boredom, but rather see it as a reflection of stability and emotional security in that bond, because you know you can trust that person who is your partner and not your enemy. In a traumatic relationship, on the other hand, it's drama after drama, and there are always tears, shouting, violence, endless silences, very passionate reconciliations, but they're always followed by new fights, and each time things escalate even more. Your nervous system is hardly ever calm when you're in a traumatic relationship. You live on edge, waiting for the next drop on that roller coaster. On the other hand, in a healthy relationship, there is freedom. Both choose to be there every day, but they could leave the relationship if they had to, because they're not together out of need or dependence, but out of conviction, by choice. In a traumatic relationship, it feels like an addiction. And even though you want to leave, you can't. And you say, I'm going to leave, but you stay there. And when you distance yourself a little or break up for a few days, you feel the kind of withdrawal an alcoholic feels when they stop drinking. You feel anxiety, desperation, and then when the good moments come back, for you it's a rush of happiness that lasts very little until the next fall. In a healthy relationship, you keep your identity. Maybe you grow and improve and let your guard down and evolve, but in essence, you're still yourself. And even though you're building a world together with someone, you still have your own individual world. On the other hand, in a traumatic relationship, little by little, you start losing parts of yourself. You isolate yourself from your friends, from your family, you stop doing things you loved, and you become very afraid to be around the other person because you feel that anything you do or say will trigger their anger, their rage, or them leaving you. And then you become a tiny person, unrecognizable even to yourself. In a healthy, conscious relationship, there is respect even during arguments. You choose your words carefully, you try to listen to the other person, you take a step back if you see you were wrong, and that doesn't happen in a trauma bond. There, arguments often cross boundaries. There are insults, there is manipulation. Those kinds of things like, if you leave me, I'll kill myself, or no one will love you like I do, or if you leave me, I'll post everything you did to me on social media. And there are a lot of emotional blackmail, a lot of guilt-tripping, physical violence, and those cold silences that hurt much more than many words. If you listening to me recognize all this, if what I'm describing sounds like your relationship or like something you've experienced, I want to tell you that I understand how hard it is. From the outside, a lot of people will say, well, if you don't like it, why are you still there? Don't you see it's hurting you? Just end the relationship and you get frustrated with yourself because you know that relationship isn't good for you. But there's something stronger than you in your heart that keeps you there, and that's the wound. That wound is what hooks you in a traumatic way to that relationship. And so all of that together, without emotional education, is a very powerful mix that hurts you. To break a trauma bond, you need courage and support. And it hurts. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It hurts. It hurts almost like the withdrawal I mentioned, like detoxing from alcohol or a drug, because those emotional highs and lows chemically create addiction. This is because there's a lot of dopamine when you get back together and a lot of cortisol, meaning stress, during fights. It's like a cocktail your body gets used to. But even so, even if you have this addiction, you can overcome it, you can get out of there, and you can reconnect with yourself and your inner peace. So if you realize you've been in traumatic relationships, don't blame yourself. You're not a weak or foolish person for having ended up there. Was it your wound that led you down that path in search of healing? But now, with this clarity you've gained today, you can decide that you never want that again. And even if it means being alone for a while, you prefer to give yourself the chance to be single, to build yourself up and strengthen your self-worth and to conquer your inner world, than to keep repeating the same pattern. So give yourself permission to let go of that burden because you deserve something much better. And with that said, after going a long way, understanding the problem, that is, the wounds, the patterns, and the types of bonds, now we come to the solution I promised you for your healing. I'm going to give you 5 very simple but very powerful steps to break your relationship patterns and achieve the love you long for. This way, you'll be able to start healing those wounds and choose from a place of wholeness, not from a place of lack. You'll also be able to nurture your self-love. And with that, your wounded inner child will no longer sabotage you. Instead, your adult self will be able to conquer your inner world and also build a healthy relationship. Let me tell you, healing is a process. I wish I could give you a magic formula like do this and tomorrow everything will be solved. But the reality is that it takes time, it requires patience, it's not linear, sometimes you're going to stumble, and that's why you have to have a lot of compassion for yourself. Every step you take on that path is worth it because it's a step toward your emotional freedom. So the first fundamental step is becoming aware. You must recognize if you're in a traumatic relationship. As long as you deny or minimize it by saying, oh, it's not that bad, you won't be able to. Couples fight, but deep down we love each other. It's going to be very hard to let go. You have to see reality as it is and honestly ask yourself if that relationship is helping you grow or if it's destroying you. Does it bring out a better version of you, or does it sink you into your own insecurities and fears? Does it make you feel freer or like you're in a prison? These are going to hurt you, but they're going to open your eyes. And not only that, you have to be able to recognize your wounds and patterns, because as long as you don't, they're going to control you. But the moment you become aware of them, you start to regain control. I remember that Laura, my student, after recognizing her pattern, had to make a very tough decision. At that time, she was tangled in a relationship that had been on and off for years. And then he would appear and disappear, give her hope and then disappoint her, make her fall in love and then leave her heartbroken. She promised herself she would leave him, but just one call from him saying, "I miss you," was enough for Laura to fall for him again. It was clearly a trauma bond, but after a lot of inner work, One day, Laura gathered the courage and wisdom and said goodbye to him. She blocked him, cried as much as she needed to, and yes, she felt like the world was crashing down on her for a while. But with the right support we gave her, she stayed strong. It was like taking off a blindfold, a huge weight off her shoulders. And after a few months, she realized she should have done that years ago, that she had lost herself just to avoid losing him. As step 2, you need to validate and feel your emotions. Healing the wound doesn't just mean understanding why you have it. That's a bit of the mistake of traditional therapy, but you really need to allow yourself to feel the original pain that you might have been avoiding and internalize new beliefs, new perceptions, new narratives, and many other things. Currently, many people don't move forward and don't heal because they believe that understanding is enough, and that's why they spend years in therapy talking about the same thing, but they don't make progress. Or is that why they read a quote on Instagram that gives them a little bit of calm for a few minutes? But nothing gets better in the long run. And like I said, you need to internalize and reprogram, not just understand. And this happens because people don't want to face their pain, they just want to validate it. Many of the behaviors we have are defense mechanisms to avoid feeling that pain. But to heal, you have to face it, you have to listen to it, and you have to make peace with it, because pain, believe it or not, is an ally. No one ever taught you to listen to it. That's why you think it's here to hurt you, but it's only here to give you a message. And this is a lot of what I teach my students in depth all the time. So give yourself permission to feel, even if it hurts, because it's going to cleanse you. Step 3 is that you need to practice reparenting. In other words, you become your own father or mother. This means giving yourself what you needed, what your father or mother couldn't give you. It's about caring for yourself daily, just as you'd want someone else to care for you. For example, if your wound is abandonment, commit to not abandoning yourself. Don't neglect your own needs just to please others, and don't self-sabotage when things are going well for you just because you think you don't deserve it. To my students, among many other techniques, I teach them to ask themselves, what do I need today to feel loved and safe? And based on those answers, to give it to themselves as much as possible. It can be basic things like resting when you're tired or choosing healthy food that truly nourishes you. Even things a bit more advanced like saying no to what harms you, or filtering certain friendships, or going for a walk to clear your mind when intrusive thoughts overwhelm you. Step 4. You must strengthen your self-love day by day. It's a daily practice. It's treating yourself the way you would treat the people you love every time you act in your own best interest and don't sabotage yourself. It's your adult and conscious version, strengthening itself, helping itself, and loving itself. Self-love, remember, isn't just saying nice things to yourself in front of the mirror and taking a bubble bath. It's really a whole discipline. That's why it's essential to seek support, educate yourself emotionally, meaning reach out to a mentor, take courses, or have consultations with people who can truly guide you. Rely on proven tools and on people who love you. That will remind you that there's more to life outside of a relationship and that you have much more power than you think, and that your happiness is not in someone else's hands. That will remind you that you deserve to be okay. And step 5, seek to educate yourself emotionally. Look for all the tools that were never given to your inner child at school or at home. Don't be afraid or ashamed to seek help. Don't feel guilty about investing in yourself, and don't be embarrassed at all to look for a mentor. You don't have to know everything yourself, and a mentor, like I'm telling you right now, can be an amazing guide and companion for you on this journey. You're not a crazy person for needing help. On the contrary, you're responsible for educating yourself, and you're brave for taking care of your emotional health. I always tell my students that. And sometimes we think that asking for help or taking a course on something to improve means admitting that something in us isn't perfect, that it makes us look imperfect compared to all the fake perfection out there. But in reality, it's one of the best decisions you can make if you really want to grow, improve, love, and be loved in a healthier way. Also, by educating yourself emotionally. You discover great new ways to connect, not just with people, but with everything in your life. With money, with food, with exercise, and many other things. As I mentioned to you, Laura, my student, left that toxic relationship that had her trapped and spent some time alone learning to be with herself. And she attended one of my courses where we processed her abandonment, the one she felt because of her father, and we worked on helping her forgive him. Not to justify him, but to free herself from the weight, the bitterness, and the resentment she was holding on to. That way, she was able to start loving herself more through actions, not just words. She started eating better, exercising, she didn't miss classes, she rediscovered her love for painting, and little by little, Laura began to smile more as she remembered that her life didn't have to be gray and that she could paint it with many colors. After a while, when Laura was no longer looking for a partner or obsessed with the subject, she met a man in a photography course she joined, and today they've been in a relationship for over a year. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful and healthy. I'm sharing these stories to show you it's possible to change your life. And sometimes when we're in the darkness of a repetitive pattern, it seems like we're never going to find a way out. But the way out is there, it exists, and you just have to learn how to spot it. And the first step? Turn on your own light to illuminate the path and see the way out. I know we've covered a lot in this episode and it might feel a bit overwhelming, but I want you to hold on to this fundamental idea. You don't have to repeat patterns forever. You have the power to break the chain and prevent a pattern from breaking you. The story of your childhood doesn't have to be the story of your adult life. You deserve, can, and will find a love that enriches your life, not diminishes it. If you really work on yourself, remember that the most important love in your life is your own. Don't forget about it and don't leave it in someone else's hands. When that love is strong, it will become a beacon. And believe me, other people will be attracted to that light. They'll notice it, they'll come to you, and they'll also shine with their own light. A relationship attracts like. If you move away from lack and enter the level of abundance, you will attract someone who is also in abundance. Or at least with the willingness to create something healthy together. And the only thing you need for that is to do inner work, which is self-love and discipline. Now, I would like to ask you something. If everything we've talked about in this episode resonated with you, and if deep down you feel that desire to keep healing, and would you like to go deeper on this path? With me as your mentor, let me know. Leave the phrase "I want more" in the comments. That way I'll know that you're interested in us continuing to explore this and many other topics together, and that you want me as your guide and want more tools so I can work on giving them to you. I have helped tens of thousands of people heal their childhood wounds, their attachment styles, and the traumas that controlled them. And above all, to build beautiful relationships and many others. Maybe they're not currently in beautiful relationships, but they're living very fulfilling single lives. So I really hope I can help you with that too. If you want to share any thoughts or experiences with me in the comments, I'll read them. We're here to support each other without judgment. Thank you for letting me accompany you for this little part of your day and your life. I truly hope all of this helps you and adds to your life. Subscribe to the channel so you get the next episodes, and don't forget, you deserve what you dream of. A beautiful, conscious, and fulfilling love step by step. If you don't give up and work on yourself, your emotional growth, and your self-love, you'll be able to create and enjoy it. I'm sending you a big hug. See you in the next session.